Awesome. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on unlocking success and the top 3 mistakes dental practices make that are costing them millions in unaccepted treatment plan. I am really excited for the opportunity to be able to bring someone that I highly respect in the industry that has over 25 years of experience teaching us dental practice teams and dental practice owners how to help us scale our practices, which is an extremely important thing because I personally work with a lot of startup practices, and the level of skills that is required for you to start a practice, it's not the same skill level that it takes when you have a large team and you want to start rendering high-end or procedure codes and services that require a new set of skills. And you need to develop these skills. Your team needs to develop these skills. And we make a lot of costly mistakes throughout that journey. Okay, so I have my special guest tonight is Sophia Dunkley, who basically is a pioneer in the force of dental practice coaching and consulting. She has an impressive record that spans over 25 years, and she has basically worked in case acceptance mastery, cultivating collaborative teams, strategic excellence when it comes to blending leadership and sales expertise within the dental practices so that you can work with your team and achieve the level of success that you want when it comes to case presentations and selling large treatment plans, okay? Helping you also and empowering you and your team with financial strategies. She has a very deep insight into practice economics, and Sophia basically provides kind of like that financial coordination that helps you create strategies to optimize the financial performance and efficiency of your practice. And there's so many things, and I really love the one area where she works with clients on cultivating collaborate teams, right? Like orchestrating the team environment where there is unity and cooperation and keystones to success, right? So these are all things that we can all work individually on growing ourselves, but when we work individually and collectively, we're able to see much more success. And I'm really honored and excited for today's webinar. Today, we're going to be learning about how to avoid these costly mistakes when it comes to treatment planning that are keeping us from scaling your practice. And again, one thing is to start a practice, and another one is for you to scale and really become profitable once you get all of the building blocks of your startup practice in place. So just a quick agenda before I hand it over to Sophia, and she can basically start telling us and breaking down for us is just the agenda. We're going to spend some time doing an overview of what these top 3 mistakes she has observed in the field. And we're going to go into a detailed discussion on each one of those mistakes. We're going to give you some tips and actionable strategies that you can potentially implement immediately. And ultimately, we're going to have a Q&A where you have the opportunity to ask her any specific questions. And ideally, based on where you are in your journey and your practice's needs, I will be more than happy for you to follow up on a conversation with her. If you are a practice owner that has been practicing for over 2 to 3 years and you have a large team and you have cases that you want to make sure that are sitting in the back drawer and there's just money leaking off the back, and you want to be able to optimize and bring back that money and add the value that is so important for your patients through the clinical care that they need, but you're just lacking the skills to be able to get them to accept that treatment. So that's the agenda. And I am going to let Sophia make an introduction and then start breaking down for us what those top 3 mistakes are. So Sophia, you can take the floor now. I'm going to mute myself now.
Thank you so much for having me, Maritza, and for that very powerful introduction. Hello, everyone. I am Sophia Dunkley, also known as the Practice Navigator, And as Maritza already told you, I've been in dentistry for a long time, since 1994. And I have been consultant since 2000. And I do have a primary focus on case acceptance. And I do focus on case acceptance because I firmly believe, after being in dentistry this long, that case acceptance and treatment acceptance is the nucleus of the dental practice. And all the other systems in the practice sustains and support the case acceptance, but case acceptance is the nucleus. And so I'm a firm believer of that. I've seen it many different ways. You can work on vision, mission, culture. However, while those things are all very important, they're all leading you to the same thing, which is the nucleus and the center of the case acceptance process. So I'm happy to be here to basically go over what I have found over the years. When Maritza reached out to me, she said, Sophia, tell me what's going on and what are the mistakes that you see out there, and just kind of centralize it to 3. I was like, 3? But, I basically was like, what I know makes a difference is starting with, really making sure that someone actually is ultimately responsible for that in your practice. So I like to say that what I find in most practices that do not have a successful case acceptance process is because there's no one in the practice that is ultimately assigned that responsibility. It's usually someone that is an office manager or a front desk receptionist, and that person is doing multiple things, multiple hats. And if we ever take the time to talk to the people who do case acceptance in our practices and who present to patients, you will realize that it is a full-time job if you really want to see success. So if you have that person split in that responsibility with several other positions, several other roles, well, the treatment acceptance and case acceptance portion of the practice is going to lose out. So, Maritza said to me, Sophia, okay, so you identify this as a huge mistake. Why is it a mistake? Because if you don't have someone ultimately responsible, then no one has ownership. And it's, go ahead, Maritza, were you going to say
No,
something?
I'm nodding my head saying yes, this is you're sharing gold.
Yes. One person ultimately responsible, and that person cannot be the person that's primarily answering the phones. They can primarily answer the phones if there's no case acceptance for them to present. But if there's no treatment plans for them to present, then we have a problem with diagnosis, right? So that person should not be your primary person answering the phones. They should be primarily responsible for the presenting to patients, the patient experience, accountable for that system, keeping that system together, making sure that system is being maintained. And so that is one of the primary reasons. And the offices that do exceptionally well, and I've seen many, I've worked in practices that are startups, I've worked in practices that are mid-level, been open for about 3 to 5 years. I've also seen practices that are niche practices, doctors who are basically, I want to do cosmetics, or I want to do full mouth restorations, or FMR practices. And the practices that do that very well, they see those results because there's someone ultimately responsible for that particular role. And all your implant arch practices all have someone that is ideally primarily responsible for that process. And if you were to talk to orthodontists, most orthodontists have treatment coordinators, and that is their primary role for keeping that system in place. So I find that to be one of the primary mistakes that most offices have. Having an office manager as your person to do case acceptance, she either needs to be the office manager, or he needs to be the office manager, or the financial coordinator or treatment coordinator. But doing both, it requires 2 different personalities, 2 different energies, 2 different sides of the brain, right? One is catering to the patient, one is enforcing policies, right? So we have to be very mindful of that, because so many times I go into practices and, it's brought to my attention, well, Susie she closes some cases, but she's not closing as well as I would expect her to. Well, let's talk about what else Susie's doing. And then there's a grocery list of things that she's doing, right? One of them being managing, or one of them managing the phones. She's just, it's like she's constantly turning on and off, on and off. Case acceptance and treatment acceptance requires that person to be really focused and tuned in with the patient and being aligned with the patient. So it takes a little bit more time. If you want to do it well and avoid chargebacks or refunds, you want someone that's 100% focused on that.
So I'm going to challenge you, and I want our audience, anyone on the chat that tell us on the chat, how far along in your journey are you with your practice? Because we have a mix of, like, I was just speaking to one of my clients who is just getting started with his practice. He has a model that is PPO, very conservative, some out of network, and it's a dental startup practice. Now his vision and the services that we are going to be that he's going to be rendering are services that are more on, he's going to be attracting more of the higher end. But when you're starting out, and you're starting out with a smaller team and growing into that, it's almost like you go through like the infancy stages of the practice. But I also want to know, because we have different audiences here, does anyone have already a practice that has an assigned, like, what would you say are the benchmarks of when and how a dentist needs to start considering bringing or transitioning someone within the practice? And what do you recommend gets done? Do we hire when, let's say I have a client, they're a year into their practice, they were able to scale the practice or at least be profitable in their first year. 6 months in, they're adding a hygienist, adding a second front desk person. I just had this conversation with a client that's 3 months in, and we are reviewing the projections for the next 6 months. And I'm like, okay, this is a time for us to add a hygienist. These are the benchmarks in terms of income to the practice. And this is when we need to start to emphasize bringing on additional people or training someone, helping them develop so that they can focus on this particular role. So what, in your experience, is what you recommend these doctors that are in that situation? When should they start considering that? And what are some best practices for doing that? When to start paying attention to it?
Absolutely. So I think that treatment acceptance, case acceptance needs to be part of the initial plan from the start. So if you're starting with a leaner team, so what that means, and what I understand that to mean, is that we're going to have a dentist, we're going to have an administrator at the front desk, or we're going to have a dental assistant. And if that's the model that we're starting with, because we're starting really lean, then the case acceptance process needs to be on the table and part of the process from the start. Because what happens is it takes time for the person that's presenting to develop. It also takes time for the dentist to get used to having this type of a model in their practice. And you have the benefit of also having your lead dental assistant at the time when you're going through this initial startup process, also being part of that. So in that type of a model, I would train both the dental assistant and the front office person as treatment coordinators. And as they develop, then hire people to take over the responsibilities that do not require case acceptance, and then have them ultimately responsible. So depending on how well you do a case acceptance process or a treatment acceptance process, that could be 6 months to 12 months. It
Yes.
depends on how quickly everyone is learning. It depends on leadership and what leadership's commitment is to this process, because we could put a lot of lip service.
I love that. Leadership commitment to this process.
Yeah, because
take notes.
we could put a lot of lip service to this. Well, as we all know, implementation is what makes or breaks it, right? Implementation is really what makes the difference between the offices that do really well and the offices that, what I call the little engine that they go up and then they slide right back down, and they go up and they slide right back down. So as we know, once we start and we take out all of these loans and we have all of these financial responsibilities, the more you present and you close, the more expenses we're gaining in addition to our normal fixed overhead. We're now gaining variable overhead because now we're presenting and closing
Yes, we're closing more cases. Awesome.
financial responsibility. So we have to keep growing. And
Yep.
so you want to have a plan in place that once these individuals, these team members are trained in that role, then we would, the responsibilities that can be directed to a new team members that does not require presenting verbal skills and all of that stuff can be delegated to someone else that is hired while these team members continue developing their roles. So that would be my recommendation for practices that are doing startups or in the first 3 to 5 years of the dental practice journey.
Awesome. And so just to circle back, and I am welcoming any questions, or we're going to have some Q&A at the end. But if anything resonates with you, let us know in the comments. And I'll pose the question to Sophia. So what I'm understanding is it is okay for you to start, but just have the clarity and develop and have the training in place. And this is important to notate, leadership commitment to that role of presenting and gaining the skills over time. The dentists, I will say this as a first-time business owner myself, it is very easy and it's a different ball game when you're working as an associate and you're relying on all these things. And you can use this time for you to develop this skill, because I've seen associates that really thrive in their production numbers and so on in comparison to others. But one of the things that you have to take ownership and responsibility yourself and apply it to yourself, and then pass it on to someone that has the personality and the leadership commitment, as Sophia is saying, temporarily. But once you know that you're growing and you have the numbers to support delegating and dividing and conquer within, just making sure that you are now having a defined role that is going to ultimately help you avoid the mistake of having, millions of dollars over time leave through the back door because you just don't have someone. So the first mistake, again, is not having an assigned role, person that has an assigned role for this task. And then for those of you who are just getting started and are thinking like, how am I supposed to afford this? Just have that clarity at the beginning. And I think that brings us to the second mistake, right?
Yes, but there's one thing that I wanted to just point out,
Sure.
is before we move on to the second level is many times I've seen this. I've seen two things actually. One is the assumption that the patient has come in and we told them a little bit of the dentistry that they need, and we're going to see them in 6 months so we could tell them the rest. That is an assumption. There's no guarantee that that patient is going to return, right? Unless you have an exceptional process, unless you did something different that another practice has not done for them in their entire lifetime, then it's presumptuous of us to assume they're going to come back in 6 months. So we need to be very intentional about making sure that we are educating the patients and basically putting them at choice, but also more importantly, letting them understand the consequences of non-treatment and how that's going to affect their quality of life as they get older, as these teeth age. So that's important. Another thing that I see is, and I wanted to talk about this as we talk about someone ultimately being responsible, is sometimes when we're short-staffed, and this is the reason why I said leadership and commitment to the process is important. Because if that treatment coordinator is spending time closing a case, more than likely that patient is showing buying signals, or that patient may have an approval or saying, yes, I really want to do this. So they're trying to just work through whatever, overcoming any objections that the patient may have. And I'll hear sometimes doctors post or say things like, well, why is she taking so long? We can't put a time on another patient's decision-making process, right? So when I say having someone ultimately responsible, I'm also saying giving them the time and the space and holding the space for them to do the process correctly. So
we're talking about our assigned team member, not the patient's timeline for making the decision. It is the process of our team member in getting the patient to the point of, coming into the practice and accepting and actually getting treatment completed. Is that what I'm understanding?
That is correct. That's correct.
Okay.
So that you're not rushing the patient along or rushing the treatment coordinator along, right? Because
Yes.
so that's why the rest of the team, when you're in that growth phase, when you're from startup to year 3 to year 5, you want to realize that the rest of the team has to piggyback while that person is in the process of trying to present and close to that patient.
You just brought up a kind of like a memory of a situation or a story, I should say, of a dentist that reached out to me. I want to say about a year ago or so, and although her practice was doing well, one of the things that that was brought up during a conversation that I thought was a mistake is that she had not hired a hygienist and she was still doing her cleanings a year into practice ownership. And so another thing that is a mistake by not having someone assigned is for you as the business owner, just being so comfortable with the day-to-day operations and not pushing yourself to the scaling part of it, and not focusing your attention on what is going to help your practice thrive and render to the patient. So not only did the doctor not have a strong person that is assigned to doing that, but even if the team member was, like had the commitment to get the patients back in, then our schedule is just getting filled and the doctor is, allocating time of her schedule to continue to do recare or to continue to do the exams or because there is not enough team members in place. So I'm coming from like the little mistakes here and there that startup dentists can make, and I think that was one that I should just definitely just bring out there. Hopefully that's not the situation with anyone, and I want to make sure that I that I stick to a lot of the services and whatnot. So I'll let you continue. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And that's a very valid point. I always say to people, you make the decision that works best for your practice as your practice ownership. However, your cost for operations is the same whether you're producing at your optimal, which if you're a high level trained dentist, you can probably produce anywhere from 500 to 600 to 1,000 per hour. Some doctors are producing 3,000 per hour, depending on the skill set and the skill level of the dentist. However, if a hygienist can take the burden of doing a hygiene and allow you to see twice as many patients, I understand the cost of having a hygienist is high, but it does allow you to see more patients.
Focus on bigger cases and
exactly, and focus on
100%.
bigger cases and increase your hourly production and collection. So, that's a table for another conversation, but that is a very valuable attention to some of the primary mistakes that I see happen. So moving on to the next mistake that I see a lot of practices making is not having a personalized treatment planning approach. So meaning there is a cookie cutter approach that is basically the experience that the patients are having. And so it's like, what makes your practice different, right? And are you customizing and personalizing the treatment plan for the lifestyle of that patient? Because the patients are not specifically saying yes to, I want a crown, or I want some fillings, or I want periodontal treatment. They're saying yes to, how is this going to benefit me? How is this going to benefit my lifestyle? So if we don't pay attention to their lifestyle, if we don't pay attention to what's happening in their life, is this a mom that just had children, or is this someone that's about to retire, or if this is someone that is retired? Those three different populations of people I just mentioned, their needs and lifestyles are completely different. So if our case acceptance process is standardized to all three of those different populations, you're not going to get a consistent yes to treatment, right? Because the motivators for someone that is completely retired is going to be different from the motivators of the woman that just gave birth to 3 children and she has 3 children under 5. And the person that's getting ready to retire, their motivators are going to be different. And all three of those populations are thinking, what is in it for me? I'm not going to die if I don't fix my teeth. That's the mentality of most patients, right? So we have to talk to them as based on what is their values, what's important to them, and how this is going to help to improve their quality of life, and how this is going to create longevity, and how this is going to benefit and help them to get to where they want to get to long term. So personalization of the treatment planning process is key, and I see that overlooked in every single practice I go into initially.
How much do you think does it affect the practices in terms of, like, do you have any case studies for um, money that has been sitting on the, software for uncompleted treatment plan or unaccepted treatment plan, that the dentists are just simply not, either not having any approach to how they do it, no particular systems in place, and or just doing a copy paste from like either the software, or not personalizing it. So tell me a little bit more about what you like, an actual case, so that everyone can get a sense of what are is the regular general public doing, so that I can come in and implement something different.
Yeah, so that's a totally amazing question that you just asked. So I have a practice that I looked at the database for the last 12 months, and then I went all the way back to 2014. And I look at the unscheduled treatment plans. Unscheduled treatment plans is probably a total of about $2 million. In the last, I'd say year and a half, unscheduled treatment plan is a 1.5 million, right? However, the office's collections is about 750,000 per year. So if that practice had a case acceptance process that was personalized, and I'm going to tell you why I say personalized. This particular demographics is in a neighborhood where the majority of the patients are retired or at the phase of retiring. So what that means is, if you have a case acceptance process with a treatment coordinator who's trained to have the conversation with that particular population and set up the discussion in a way, how is this going to benefit you into retirement? Your case acceptance would be significantly higher. So after going in, after having, I think it was like probably 6 weeks, we were able to double the collection in that practice, because all we did differently was pay attention to the population of the retired patient base, or people transitioning in retirement. Now, that particular demographics is very unique. They have higher access to income in the sense that they're usually working in jobs for at least 25 to 30 years. So they have access to retirement funds that they could withdraw. They have, a lot of times they can qualify for payment plans if they don't have finances readily available. Many of them, to a lot of people's surprises, have credit cards that you would not expect, because they've been working for 25, 30 years. This population is often overlooked. This population is often judged. Oh, well, if they let their teeth fall apart this much, then they probably have no values and don't really want to move forward with treatment. And that is often not the truth. Judgment plays a huge role in what holds a lot of people back. Just by implementing a process where we're not judging people, we're paying attention, and we're talking the language for this population that they understand, we were able to see a significant increase in collections and case acceptance just by making that simple change. And if we were to do this on a consistent basis by looking at the demographics of the practice, then we know how to position our conversation. We know how to position our case acceptance process, right? So yes, and you'll be surprised. We've said it for years in dentistry. A lot of consultants, there's a lot more treatment diagnosed than actually being executed. It's true, but it even goes way beyond that. It's not just we're not doing the process, ideally, or we don't have someone ideally assigned for that responsibility, we're also not personalizing it based on the patient's values.
That is, and you touched on a really important point when you said we are judging the patients, and that is also something that I have learned is a bottleneck in some practices. I should say I had a situation once, and I would love to hear like any examples that you may have, but I remember there was I helped a pediatric dentist in New Jersey, very well known, magic, doctor, and I worked very closely with his wife, and we were working with a new team member for the practice. Now, you know, a lot of like different specialties have different ways of attracting and different demographics, but your model and the services that you do are totally separate. And this is not a case treatment presentation situation. This was the mindset of the individual. And this is like a total educational conversation to be had. But I just want to touch a little bit on the surface about paying attention to that one person that you're assigning the role to as and working from yourself. Like a lot of times we are not comfortable or we have the clinical skills, but we don't have the mindset yet. And we are the ones placing judgment onto our potential clients. And or in this case, like the person that we are, so Sophia shared with us, the first mistake is not having an assigned role. Even if you're a small practice owner, you should have someone that is committed to that purpose within the practice, you and your lead assistant or the administrator temporarily, and divide and conquer. Now, the second mistake is not personalizing the approach for your audience, for the person that you are treating. However, one thing that I wanted to just add to Sophia's point here is the mindset and the relationship that the person has when it comes to judging the ability of the patient to accept treatment, because energy is contagious. Exactly. And yes, so in that particular case, when I was doing the training, the person that was assigned the role of like the treatment acceptance for this fee-for-service practice, more or less at this point, was like, oh my gosh, like every time I said, this is the package for our initial visit, and every time, like, you could see on her face that she was like, oh, her mouth dropped like in fear over the fees that she was supposed to present to the patients. So now if I am the person in charge of presenting treatment and I find that the services are expensive to begin with, then we have an issue. But that's a different conversation, and I want to stick to the point here. I don't know if you have any examples of how to personalize the approach, given that we check the boxes, we have someone assigned, that person's leadership commitment to the role is there, and they're not judging the process or like the patients. How do they create, like, give us a little bit of like a strategy that our audience can tomorrow start implementing in their practices?
So that's a very powerful point that you just made. And like you said, energy is contagious. And so I'm a certified leadership executive coach. And so one of the things we talk about is understanding a person's energetic stress response. And so sometimes a person may have a stress response to the discussion of money. And that energetic stress response can be from the patient side or the presenter side or the dentist side. And so having an understanding of that and preemptively making sure that there's a strategy to deal with that. So if I had a treatment coordinator, financial coordinator that has a situation where there's a stress response around money, then we would already have that conversation to make sure that we have the right person in the right seat on the bus, as we would say in good to great, right? So that person could be a lovely employee, could be great at processes, could be emotionally committed, but if they cannot overcome or release the energy that is presenting itself when they are discussing money with the patient, then they may not be the ideal person for that role, even though they may be such a wonderful and amazing person and probably is a gem to the practice, right? If it's a patient, then as a treatment coordinator, you want your treatment coordinator to be equipped with the verbal skills to be able to overcome any objections that come up. And if it's a doctor, and that's where I come into play, and I work with coaching and working with the doctor about that. But pedo is a very unique model, right? And I do have pedo clients, and with pedo, it's about the experience for the child, and the experience for the child has to be exceptional. That influences the parents, who's the decision makers, emotional response to saying, yes, this is the right practice, or yes, I'm going to go ahead and do this treatment. And so those are key factors that have to be taken into consideration when we're dealing with a pedo model. And that's what I mean when I say personalizing the approach for the patient and the situation that we're dealing with. So actionable steps moving forward, if we're dealing with a scenario similar to what you just mentioned, is to analyze and look, do I have the right person in the right seat on the bus? And if there's some doubts about that, let's uncover what that doubt is. As a coach, I do case acceptance, but I'm also coaching to make sure the right person is in the right position. And I am not about terminating or making people's life difficult. Absolutely not. I'm about, let's talk about it. Let's see if it's a real barrier, and let's work through that so you can release that energy. I'm about trying to get people to be very successful and not about anything else but that.
I love it. Absolutely. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but tell us about the third mistake.
Sure. The third mistake is not having a case acceptance or treatment acceptance process in place at all, or the process that you have in place is inadequate. That is key. Most offices do not have a process in place. And what do we mean by a process? Because I know, what are you talking about? I go in, I do the exam, I say this is what they need, and Susie presents the case, and she either gets a yes or she gets no. There's a lot more to it than that. There is the entire patient journey and the patient experience. You understanding, how did this patient land in your practice is important. Was the patient referred by someone, and who referred them? Because that tells you a little bit about what they know about your practice already.
Yes.
Usually those patients, we call it preheated, right? If a patient was referred by an existing patient who has had successful dentistry in your practice, that patient has been preheated. So your case acceptance process, your treatment acceptance process is going to be a lot shorter than your patient that is coming in from a marketing piece who knows absolutely nothing about your practice, and they're coming in because they saw something advertised online. That person, we're going to have to win them over. We're going to have to show social proof. We're going to have to show cases that we've done successfully. We're going to have to create alignment and get connection with them before we even start to discover and uncover what it is that they need. We have to basically show them, let them know about our doctor's credibility, how long our doctor's been. All of that comes into play. So having a process in place is key, and having someone to help to support your practice in that process is key. So for example, I could say to you, yeah, let's get a treatment coordinator that's ultimately responsible for all of this, but who's supporting that person? Who's training them? Who's giving them the verbal skills? Who's helping them overcoming when a patient gets really angry about a treatment? Who's helping them uncover, okay, I did everything you said, Sophia, but something didn't go as planned in this case acceptance. What else could I have done? Who's helping them reverse engineering through that process? And so we take the role of a treatment coordinator, financial coordinator for granted, right? When they close, we all celebrate and have a party. And when they don't close, we all blame them. But no one ever spends the time to say, what can I do to help this person feel good and great about this job, but also help them to be consistently successful and help together creating that collaborative relationship, leadership of all in your team so that everyone could work together and grow together. So that's what I mean about, not having a process. It's actually a written process that is duplicatable, that is trainable to everyone, that we could go back and look at, reference, and modify.
So when we say processes or systems, is this something like a dentist that right now, and I encourage everyone that is in that journey of trying to improve their case acceptance. If you have treatment plan sitting in your, like in your incompleted treatment plan, just reach out to Sophia. Based on just today's conversation, there are certain things that you can start implementing right away. Uh, but to your point, when we have a situation in a practice where the the dentist a lot of times, and I saw this in social media not too long ago, like the husband of a dentist was just like putting all the blame on the front desk person. Oh, I'm getting them, they're not doing the recare, they're not, like the front desk person, almost releasing the responsibility and the outcome of the results of your business. And I always go back to my clients. We are the parents of our employees in the sense that they are sponges, and we have to put the mask on ourselves first. We have to have the clinical excellency there to support that. Because I will tell you, uh, in my career, there was one dentist that I'm not going to name because I would get in trouble for that, but I would never refer them to a patient, and to a certain degree, just because of the, you know, everyone that is here on this call or that may be watching this, you care about developing the skills that you pick up on the chair, but then you know that as a business owner, you have to work on other aspects of helping better your patients, because there are a lot of great marketers out there, and it goes across all different, industries. Like there are people that are great at marketing and they don't even have a business, but they're great at marketing and they create it out of thin air with no systems, with no substance. And then it happens in dentistry where you have amazing clinicians that lack the skills to be able to get patients to say yes. And just because someone else has the confidence, has the verbal skills, they go through all of this funnel to sit on the chair, and then the work may not be exceptional. But when you are getting patients referred to you, and when you are in, like, stand by the work that you have a responsibility to develop these skills and also nurture your team and work together instead of delegating and outsourcing the responsibility to someone that it's feeding off of your energy and your leadership and the skills that you mentioned this before, the social proof, like the finished cases, like take pride on all these things and get your team involved throughout the process. And for things that are working, just systems to me is once you figure out that something has worked for you, just continue using it. Like I have systems for, I send a good email, it gives me sort of like the response that I'm looking for. I'm going to systematize that. So when you say written processes, is that what you're referring to? And is
Absolutely.
it okay?
Absolutely. And so we're talking about from the way a patient enters the practice, what is the preheat conversation, what happens in the tour, what happens in the process of the treatment planning, a case acceptance process, financing, how do you get them to say yes? How are we sequencing it? The whole entire patient journey needs to be mapped out, because otherwise your team is not going to be consistent. So the patient experience is not going to be consistent. And we all know what happens when patient experience is not consistent. We get not so good reviews. So leadership comes into play, right? And so, we take responsibility for the business. I will say in many scenarios, this is a dental practice. When a doctor makes a decision to open and buy a dental practice, they're making a decision that is going to impact their future retirement. And so when they make that decision, managing it and turning it over to team members that are well trained and supported affects that retirement process and that retirement goal and that wealth, that building of wealth. And so oftentimes that's overlooked until they're in a lot of trouble. Then that's when we're running out of, we're approaching it from a crisis perspective. However, I find that by having a robust case acceptance process, we are able to sustain a lot, and we can build all of our other supporting systems from that case acceptance process. That's what I do, and I do that every day. I come in, I train your team, I sit down, help them with verbal skills, help them with the process, make sure everything is working for the benefit of the practice. And if I'm not doing that in person, I'm doing that via Zoom. But it's important that that team feels supported, so that way they're making the right decision to protect that doctor's nest egg, basically.
How is the timeline? Is it you customize the written processes for each practice? So how do you do it? Do you typically take one case and use it as a model so that they can
No,
implement it for everyone else, or do you come in and you bring in all of your best practices already, the blueprint,
I'm coming
and
in
you
with
just
my best practices and customizing the best practices to fit that practice. So this is what I've done. This is what I've seen. What I do differently is I've gone for a lot of training on case acceptance. This is not, I didn't just sit in a course a couple of times and said I'm a case acceptance coach. I've done training for many, many years, since 2002 till current. I'm constantly always up leveling my training regarding this specific topic. But not only that, I keep myself in the trenches. So I'm
guys,
always still presenting, closing 10, 50, 20,
beautiful.
30, 50, $60,000 cases. So I am not speaking to people or doctors or teams out of something I did 15, 20 years ago. I'm speaking of things that I've done, tried, practiced,
Tested
executed
recently.
now, right now. And so in order for me to be able to get a team member to be successful, they have to believe it, right? A lot of times you come,
Yes,
not going to believe it. So I have to show them the process. I have to actually do it and have them then watch them do
let
it.
them.
And we
Beautiful.
work together and we work out what we need to fix. So it's worked beautifully. So
How are you guys feeling about this? Let us know in the chat. Turn on your things. We're going to be wrapping up soon, and I just want to make sure I get feedback from you. How do you guys feel about our presentation so far? Sophia has been sharing so many good insights that I'm hoping you guys are going to be able to take advantage of and implement. I'm not sure. I think so. Last mistake to wrap up, and you shared with us basically how to have an acceptance process. It needs to be written, and it needs to be like a workflow from the moment a person gets on the phone, whether they are a warm lead or they were referred by someone. That impacts the timeline for case acceptance. It shrinks it because you've already shown the authority, but the process is not going to be the same for someone that is responding to an ad or something online. I always say this: the first is not the most important sale. It is the second or the third, because the second, the third visit is the one that is going to tell you as a business owner that you have met their expectations and that they now trust you. And when we're talking and putting all of these efforts and money into like the outside world, it doesn't have the same benefit as when you focus on what you already have and the people that have already entrusted you with their care. So that's super important. I think that you sent me the questions. I put together some of the slides. There was one thing that I just want to go over any questions that people have. So does anybody have any questions or any comments that you want to share with us? So anyone, we're opening up the chat right now. So Dr. Ali just wave hello. Dr. Annie is giving us a thumbs up. Thank you for that. What was one, if you can just type on the chat, what is the one thing that tomorrow or over the next month or so, we are in the half of the year, and if you were to want to have an accountability partner, let me know in the chat what would be one step that you're going to take or implement from what you learned today over the next 90 days in your practice. Anyone, feel free to turn on your unmute yourself and let us know. I really love homework and holding ourselves accountable for when we acquire information, assimilating it and making sure that we are that we're applying the information that we are learning. So I would love to hear from you. What is one action item that you're going to start working on tomorrow? Let us know in the chat, and we'll just give it a couple of more minutes.
And for many people, at the time, it's something that they never really thought about. Like, they just see the people at the front desk and they're like, well, that's her job, right? But if that person or he is doing multiple roles, then they're not paying as much attention to the position of case acceptance and treatment acceptance. It's a full job. It requires a lot of follow-up. It requires being prepared. There's a lot of preparation that goes into play. So it's something that takes some thinking, right? So
now, there was one last thing that I found today. I actually took a screen shot of this just so that we can understand the difference between starting a practice or a business and scaling a business. And in order for us to scale a business, right, we have to have the process of setting up systems and support to enable a company to grow without hindrance, right? Requires planning, funding, the right people, processes, technology, and partners. And I'm really excited because I know that we were able to partner up with Sophia today on asking her questions about exactly this, right? Like, we start our practices, our businesses, we position ourselves, and we have the social proof, but now we want to minimize the amount of chair side and increase and optimize the production time for our time as business owners. And in order for us to do that, we need to get patients to agree to treatment. And that requires putting a lot of processes and systems in place. So Sophia, can you tell us what is the best way for people to find you? Because I don't know if you want to write down your website or information on the chat, I will love that, because I want to make sure that everyone that is on here that wants to schedule a time to connect with you has that opportunity. So if you don't mind sharing it on the chat, so we can
absolutely. So if you could show your slide again, the one before this one, what I thought was really powerful in that slide is know your purpose. Make sure your company culture is aligned with your purpose and strategy. That is very powerful, because oftentimes we're not aware of how our practice culture affects our case acceptance. The things that the team members say, whether they're at the front or they're presenting, or whatever the practice culture is extremely beneficial and impactful on the case acceptance process. And so that slide, when you put that up, really, really jumped out at me, because it's really, really key to what I feel is important in terms of what dictates whether team members buy in or not. You can't do it without team members. You have to do it with them. So it's key. I just sent my website. You can definitely send me a message or email me, or you can reach out to me at my cell phone number, 347-577-9102. And I'm sending that also. So I will happily do what I call boost your case acceptance chat.
Beautiful. I love it. Well, Sophia, I think that, having you tonight has been an eye-opening. I am a student myself all the time. I know that you're out there closing big cases and just grasping and putting all of this and passing it on to all of your clients, and you're really devoted to what you do. And so I am like so grateful to have had the opportunity to share this stage and be able to pick your brain and hear from you. So Dr. Annie is saying thank you for your time. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you. I'm going to make sure that you get the recording also with her contact information, and anyone that is watching the replay, make sure that if you're stuck at all, you don't have to do this alone. If you're thinking about starting a practice from scratch and you want help throughout that beginning stages, I am like passionate about dentists who are first-time practice owners through this journey. Once you are already established, you have a team that you trust and you want to scale your practice. And I surround myself with a lot of experts that have substance in the industry, and Sophia is one of them. And so I encourage you to acquire as much help as you can afford as a first-time business owner, so that you and your family and your patients and your team can all benefit from the decisions that you make. Thank you, everyone. Any last words you want to share with our audience, Sophia, before we wrap up?
Sure, absolutely. I appreciate everyone for taking the time. I know I'm competing against another very important
That's right.
online debate right now. So I really, really appreciate you all. And again, case acceptance, I'm very passionate about it. It is the key to really, really having the practice of your dreams, to be quite honest. I've seen it over and over again. And I'm happy to have a boost your case acceptance chat with anyone that just wants to just kind of ask some questions and figure some things out. But I'm honored to be here. And the thing that I will say is the decisions you make now about your practice and your business and your life in general will determine your quality of life in the next 10 to 15 years.
I love that. You couldn't have said anything better to wrap up. Everyone, thank you so much for supporting us and for showing up. God bless you. Have a good night, and we will definitely stay in touch. Thank you,
Bye.
Sophia. Bye, everyone.
Bye.